attain God consciousness, to fear the Lord who created them from one soul, and who created from that one soul its mate. And that he says, fear your Lord, through whom you demand your rights of mutual kinship, and that he is ever watchful over you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqu rabbakum, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha wa tanzur nafsun ma qaddamat lighadin wa taqullaha, innallaha khabirun bima ta'malun. And so he says, now addressing believers, that we should attain God consciousness, and we should be aware, we should be wary of what we put forward for what is to come, that is the day of judgment. Right, now we should be careful of what we put forward for what is ahead of us. And again, we should attain God consciousness, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware of what we do. Today, I would like us to reflect on a set of ayat that we come across regularly. And if we have the practice of reciting Surah Al-Kahf every Friday, then we come across these verses every Friday. And this is the set of verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a parable of the man of the two gardens. Right? We know the story very well, but I want us to really consider what are some of the insights that we're supposed to gain from this. Right? Why is it that we look at this every Friday? Right? What are we meant to learn from these verses? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, giving us the example, وَاضْرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَلَ رَجُلَيْنِ جَعَلْنَا لِأَحَدِهِمَا جَنَّتَيْنِ مِنْ أَعْنَابٍ وَحَفَفْنَاهُمَا بِنَخْلٍ وَجَعَلْنَا بَيْنَهُمَا زَرْعًا كِلْتَا الْجَنَّتَيْنِ آتَتْ أُكُلَهَا وَلَمْ تَظْلِمْ مِنْهُ شَيْئًا وَفَجَّرْنَا خِلَالَهُمَا نَهَرًا. And so he says that, give them the example of two men. So we have two companions, right? One of them, he says, he has given two gardens, right? He has given them two gardens, and he says that he has placed around these gardens palm trees, right? So we want to kind of actually visualize what's going on here. So he has protected these gardens with palm trees, right? So think about, like a sort of natural fortress, so to speak. So theoretically, it's protected it from storm damage, from wind damage. It's protected from all sides, right? And then he says that he has also given it water, right? He has placed a river right in between it. So it's kind of has this natural source of irrigation, which is something not to be taken for granted. It has this natural source of water. And it also elevates the place visually, right? Aesthetically, it elevates the place, the scenery, so to speak. So he has beautified it and made it such that it always gave produce. So it always yielded produce, right? And so, year in, year out, this man was able to gain an immense amount of wealth from these gardens, right? Think about the many benefits that one can gain from this. At the time it would have been grapes, at the time it would have been wine, selling these things for its many uses, right? Selling this for its many uses, of course, protection, food, and so on and so forth. Right? Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that these two gardens, they continuously gave produce, and they were never at a loss. Right? So whenever you would try to yield from the fruits, imagine that you want to go there and take your crops, right, to see how much did my garden produce today. Some of you who might be gardeners, you have this experience. Let's see what's going on in the garden today, right? Some days you have more, some days you have less. That is the nature of gardening. But for this person, Allah says, "Lam tazlim minhu shay'an." He was never at a loss. Okay, what does this do to the ego? Or let's say, what is the temptation? What is at risk here? What is at risk here if somebody is continuously in a state of material wealth? Right? And of course, we have to ask ourselves, to what extent do we mirror this individual? So what does it do to the ego when we are continuously in a state of material wealth? Material wealth, of course, not spiritual wealth necessarily. Alright? And so, Allah says, وَكَانَ لَهُ ثَمَنٌ فَقَالَ لِصَاحِبِهِ وَهُوَ يُحَاوِرُهُ أَنَا أَكْثَرُ مِنْكَ مَالًا وَأَعَزُّ نَفَرًا. So we have to see that these two are speaking, right? The man that owns the two gardens and some companion of his. And we were just asking the question, what does it do to the ego to have a bunch of stuff? To have a bunch of material wealth, to have accumulated a lot of stuff. What does it do to the ego? To have the newest car, to have the newest whatever, right? To have the grandest house, what is the temptation is what we're asking here. And so these two are talking, and of course, the person now defines himself, the one that owns the gardens, he defines himself based on this material wealth. And so he says all of a sudden, right? Boasting about himself. He says, I have more than you when it comes to wealth. And I have more followers than you, right? I have more people that can be at my beck and call. I have more followers than you. I have more influence than you. I have more pull than you. And you can tell that for him, this is what makes him. This is the metric of success. What is success to him? That I have more in the dunya. That's what success is. That's what makes me me for this individual. Right? So, for us, is success defined by, the balance in our account? Right? Is success defined? This person says, wa'azu, right, nafara. I have more nafar, I have more pull, more people following me. Right? Today we live in the era of influencers. If we were to be frank, especially the younger among us, that people for sure are tempted to define themselves based on how many followers they have. Right? There are people that will know the exact number of followers that they have, and they're checking it regularly. They're checking it regularly, and the more it is, the better they feel about themselves. Why? Because we have been deceived into defining success by these things, like this individual here. So it's a source of pride. It's what makes me great. That I have more wealth, that I have more influence, right? I have more children, and so on. Okay, and then his companion tells him that this wealth of yours, right? Now he says, are you disbelieving in the person that created you from Turab? You'll notice that the person that owns the gardens, he never uttered explicitly a word of disbelief. Right? He never said, I disbelieve. Well, what does he do? He says that, that's the issue. Because I am entitled to material success, right? Because it's been easy for me, I don't expect that this will ever end. This will never cease. Right? That's the deception. That's the delusion. I cannot envision this to end. Why? Because I'm so great, of course I'm going to have material wealth. I'm so awesome and wonderful, of course this is going to continue on and on and on. Right? Because I'm wonderful. So I can't even picture that. Right? But he says that, were it to end, then I will actually find something greater with my Lord. Notice the delusion, right? First it says, it doesn't make sense to me that this will end because, after all, I'm so great, I am deserving of these things. Which is to say that he believes he has these gardens because of his own merit. Right? Because of his own merit. By the way, that is another deception of our time. There are a lot of people who will tell you that they've reached their level of success because of their own can-do attitude. Right? When we know that there is no such thing as a self-made individual, it doesn't exist. It does not exist. Right? Anybody who reached some level of success had to depend in some manner upon others. Right? But once they get there, once they reach that success, they start to feel themselves, right? And so they start to think that they got here because of their own work, purely for that, purely out of their own merit. And so they're entitled to these things, right? So I'm entitled to this degree, I'm entitled to this job, and so on. So it won't make sense that I will lose it. But let's just entertain the idea that I will lose it. This is basically what he says. Let's just entertain that idea. Then, you know what? I will find something better with my Lord. He actually expresses that I will find something better with my Lord. So this is somebody that believes in the existence of Allah, Jalla Jalaluhu. And yet, his companion says, right? Do you disbelieve? Or are you ungrateful to the one who created you from dust, right? From earth. And why is this? Because what he's telling him is that by associating these things that you have, these blessings that you have, to yourself, forgetting the source, right, of your blessings, you have essentially fallen into disbelief. Right? And this is an important lesson for us. When we forget the source, our scholars will talk about recognizing the difference between the ni'mah, the blessing, the favor, right, and the mun'im. And the purpose of our favors, the purpose of our blessings, is so that we look at the mun'im, the source of the blessings. But what happens with Bani Adam, with me, with you, right, children of Adam, is that we get obsessed, by the favor, right? So we hyper-focus on those things that Allah has granted us as though they are the objective. And then we, Allah protect us, slip into thinking those favors are entitlements. So first, instead of focusing on the mun'im, the source of the favor, we start to hyper-focus on the favor itself. To the point where we start to believe that we are entitled to that favor. And what's worse, right, the more challenging aspect of this for us human beings is that we often don't articulate it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the example of somebody who was so bold, so brash, to say that I don't expect this to ever end. To say that even if it does end, I'll find something better with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a clear example. The clarity of the example is not so that, the person who, only those who say this fall into this. It's to make us consider to what extent is our disposition, right? Our emotional, our spiritual disposition, does it mirror this person? So we don't have to say, you know what, I'm entitled to my favors, to act in that way, right? And so this is the challenge. The challenge is that we might fall into this pattern where we actually believe that we are entitled to our favors, that it is mine to claim, even if we don't say that in our mind. And if we believe it, and if we act in that way, right? So, for example, when we engage with our spouses, do we act as though we are entitled, right, to this favor? When we engage with our children, do we act as though we are entitled to this? Or do we act as though this is a ni'mah from the mun'im, the source of the favor, and so because of that, that requires a certain way of engagement with that ni'mah, right? So when we kind of reorient ourselves in that way, when we say, this child of mine, this spouse of mine, this job of mine, this wealth of mine, is not an entitlement, but it's actually a favor from the source of the favor. And so that requires a certain way of engaging with it. That changes everything. That changes everything. Now I will deal with my spouse in a way that's kind of commensurate with the idea that this is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A gift from Allah, right? Now I engage with my wealth with the idea that this is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? It's not just mine that I'm entitled to. As opposed to this individual, right, where his companion warns him, are you disbelieving in your Lord? Because it is possible. You say that this thing will never cease to end. It is possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might send a disaster, a storm to destroy this, right? And it is possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might grant me better than yours, right? And of course, as we know, what is the end result? That this person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does send him this in this world for him to learn. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends a storm which uproots everything, right? We are told he comes to his garden and he sees the roots above, literally uprooted, everything turned over upside down, right? And then this is when he says that, Ya laytani, right? Lam ushrik bi rabbi ahada. Right? If only I had not associated any partners with my Lord. This person, with his own mouth, acknowledges that he had committed a type of shirk. And again, you'll notice that nowhere in this entire conversation do we see him, putting some idol and bowing to the idol. Right? He doesn't do that. That's not the shirk that we see him doing here. The shirk that we see him doing is that he assumed he is entitled. Right? This is mine. I decide that this is mine. I am worthy of this wealth. When it is actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that decides, the fadl is his, right? And he gives it to whomever he wills. And so this is the problem here. And so there's a thin line between ego and shirk. A thin line between ego, right? Arrogance, and believing whatever I have I'm entitled to it, and shirk. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from both diseases. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين. Now, so this individual here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in a sense, we can say for sure he is punished in this dunya, right? For sure, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused him to see the errors of his ways, right? And it was a major, grave punishment. There are some who say that it is better. So first of all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, gives us the opportunity to drag us to him gently, right? It is through reminders, through counsel, through mutual counsel. Our friends come to us and they say, sister, brother, would it not be better if, like this brother, this companion of sin of his, this was an opportunity to be dragged gently to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It would have been better if he had said, Qulta ma sha Allah. That was the first opportunity. That was a gentle way of being dragged to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what we want, by the way. That when we are distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he will give us gentle ways. These things that you're using to define yourselves, they will all fade. They will all fade. Kullu man alayha fan. Right? Everything will cease. So these things that you're using to say that, to define as a measure of success, that is not it. He will give us these gentle reminders, the khutbahs, our reflection of the Quran, and so on. And that's what he gave this individual first, with his companion. But what happens when we don't have the spiritual awareness to be receptive to those reminders? He was not spiritually ready to receive what his companion said as a reminder. Imagine if he had been at the state such that he could hear what his friend said and recognize, you know what, you're right. It's egotistical. Or it's boastful of me to think that I am deserving of this. What would have been the end of the story? That's it. He would continue to engage with this wealth as is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, none of this is to say that we're not meant to seek material elevation. By the way, we need the money makers, right? We need people to fund the Masjid. We need people to fund the madaris. We need people to fund scholarships and so on. So, and we know from our tradition, there are those who gave immense wealth from the very beginning, from the Sahaba, right? To ensure, to aid, to facilitate the success of Islam. The idea is the issue is how do we engage with this wealth? How do we see this wealth? Do we define ourselves with this wealth? And so if this person had listened to his friend, that would have been the end of the story. He would have continued to have his 2 gardens. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would continue to protect it from him, and he would be able to use it, sure, for the benefit of his family, but also for the benefit of the ummah. But he was not receptive to that. So we were saying that there are some, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will drag them gently, and then there are some, even worse, Allah will drag them with punishment in this dunya. Right? And so that's what will happen to this person. Okay. Now, strangely enough, this is we can see this as a sad ending, but in a way, it's also there's some opportunity here. You'll notice that he recognized the wrong, that he was in the wrong here, and he expressed regrets in this dunya. The worst of these degrees is to fail completely to see any of the ayat in the dunya, and then to be dragged to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. Right? Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that, you were heedless, you were blind in this world, and so I made you blind in the hereafter. That's the worst of all. So we seek protection from being dragged through punishment to live in this dunya, and even worse of all, in the hereafter. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us receptive to His ayat in this dunya. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from kibr, to protect us from arrogance. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from shirk, from polytheism. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to continue to protect us and make our affairs easy. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. اللهم اغفر لنا وللمسلمين وللمسلمات وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات وأقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله.
الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا يا بني إسرائيل اذكروا نعمتي التي أنعمت عليكم وأوفوا بعهدي أوف بعهدكم وإياي فارهبون وآمنوا بما أنزلت مصدقا لما معكم ولا تكونوا أول كافر به ولا تشتروا بآياتي ثمنا قليلا وإياي فاتقون ولا تلبسوا الحق بالباطل وتكتموا الحق وأنتم تعلمون وأقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة واركعوا مع الراكعين أتأمرون الناس بالبر وتنسون أنفسكم وأنتم تتلون الكتاب أفلا تعقلون واستعينوا بالصبر والصلاة وإنها لكبيرة إلا على الخاشعين الذين يظنون أنهم ملاقو ربهم وأنهم إليه راجعون. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم إن الله فالق الحب والنوى يخرج الحي من الميت ومخرج الميت من الحي ذلكم الله فأنى تؤفكون فالق الإصباح وجعل الليل سكنا والشمس والقمر حسبانا ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم وهو الذي جعل لكم النجوم لتهتدوا بها في ظلمات البر والبحر قد فصلنا الآيات لقوم يعلمون وهو الذي أنشأكم من نفس واحدة فمستقر ومستودع قد فصلنا الآيات لقوم يفقهون الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر السلام